My husband gambled away our life savings, then blamed me for not making enough money. I made sure he lost everything else too. I found out about the gambling when I tried to pay for our daughter's college tuition. The account that should have had $80,000 had $12.40. For 15 years, I'd been putting half my paycheck into that account while my husband Paul handled our other finances. We both worked full-time, him as a sales manager and me as a nurse. And we'd agreed to live off his salary while mine went straight to savings for the kids' college and our retirement. Paul always showed me fake statements he'd printed out showing our money growing with interest. He'd been taking cash advances on credit cards I didn't know existed, putting them in the account temporarily when he knew I might check, then pulling it right back out for his next bet. The college called saying the payment bounced, and that's how I discovered Paul had been gambling everything at the casino 40 minutes from his office. He'd been going there every lunch break and after work, telling me he was doing client dinners or working late. The casino knew him by name and comped his drinks. He'd lost $300,000 over 5 years, including taking out a second mortgage on our house that he forged my signature for. When I confronted him, he actually said it wasn't that bad because he'd been close to winning so many times. He said I didn't understand gambling strategy, and that's why I was overreacting. He told me winners don't quit when they're down, and he just needed one big win to make it all back plus more. He even blamed me for not making more money so he wouldn't have felt pressure to multiply our savings through gambling. I knew divorcing him would leave me with nothing since he'd destroyed our credit and accumulated massive debts in both our names. So I got creative. First, I opened new bank accounts in only my name and had my paychecks deposited there. Paul didn't notice because he was too focused on his gambling to pay attention to real finances. Then I started my performance. I began buying lottery tickets and scratch-offs. Just a few at first. I'd leave them around the house and mention casually that I felt lucky. Paul laughed at me saying lottery was for suckers and real gamblers played cards and slots. After a month, I told Paul I'd won $5,000 on a scratch-off. I showed him a losing ticket I'd altered with Photoshop and printed on cardstock. His eyes lit up and he asked for the money to invest in his system at the casino. I told him I'd already deposited it in a new investment account that was locked for 6 months. He was furious but couldn't do anything. Over the next few weeks, I kept winning smaller amounts, always showing him fake tickets. 200 here, 500 there. Each time I said it was going into the locked investment account. Paul started buying lottery tickets himself, spending hundreds trying to match my luck. He was convinced I had some system and demanded I tell him. I said I just picked numbers that felt right. Meanwhile, I was actually working overtime shifts and saving every penny in my secret accounts. Paul was so focused on lottery tickets, he stopped going to the casino as much. Then came the big one. I told Paul I'd won $50,000 in the state lottery. I created an elaborate fake congratulations letter and even had my friend call pretending to be from the lottery office. Paul completely lost it with excitement. He already had plans for the money, including a sure bet at the casino that would triple it. I told him the payout would take 3 weeks to process. During those 3 weeks, Paul went insane with gambling fever. He maxed out our last credit card buying lottery tickets, convinced lightning would strike twice. He borrowed money from his brother, promising to pay back double when my winnings came in. He even took a loan from one of those shady cash advance places. He was so sure the $50,000 was coming, he bet everything he could borrow. The day the money was supposedly arriving, I filed for divorce and moved out. I left Paul a note saying I'd never actually won anything and that all the tickets were fake. I told him I'd been saving my real money while he destroyed himself chasing my imaginary winnings. The divorce lawyer I'd already hired had documentation of all Paul's gambling debts and the forged mortgage documents. The judge was horrified that Paul had stolen our children's college funds to gamble. Paul got all the debt in the divorce since he'd created it through criminal forgery. I got my separate savings and my car. Paul had to move back with his mother, who was disgusted when she found out he'd gambled away her grandchildren's futures. The best part was, the week after Paul moved out, the one real lottery ticket I'd bought on a whim 6 months earlier hit for $3.2 million. I sit in my car outside the house I just moved out of, staring at the lottery ticket in my hands that I bought 6 months ago on a random impulse. The numbers match perfectly, all 6 of them, and the jackpot amount of 3. $2 million feels like the universe's twisted sense of justice after Paul destroyed everything. I start laughing and crying at the same time because the timing is so absurd it doesn't feel real. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely hold the ticket, and I keep checking the numbers again, even though I've already checked them 5 times. The date on the ticket shows I bought it the same week I opened my secret bank accounts, back when I was still pretending to believe Paul's lies about working late. I remember standing in the gas station, exhausted after a double shift, and buying it because the jackpot had rolled over to some crazy amount. Then I shoved it in my wallet and forgot about it completely while I was busy planning my fake lottery scheme to destroy Paul. Now here I am with an actual winning ticket worth more money than I've ever imagined having, and Paul is at his mother's house probably still convinced he was one bet away from winning big. I wipe my eyes and start the car because I need to tell someone about this before I lose my mind, and the only person I trust right now is Liam. I drive straight to his office even though it's almost 6 in the evening and his receptionist is packing up to leave. She looks surprised to see me, but I must look crazy because she immediately asks if I'm okay. I tell her I need to see Liam right now. It's an emergency. And she picks up the phone to call him. Liam comes out of his office still wearing his suit from court, takes one look at the ticket and my face and pulls me into his office without saying a word. He closes the door and tells me to sit down while he calls the state lottery office to verify the numbers. I sit there shaking while he's on the phone, listening to him read off the numbers and the ticket serial code to whoever's on the other end. He's quiet for a long time, just listening, and then he looks at me with this expression I can't read. He confirms it's real and tells me we need to claim it right away before Paul somehow finds out, and I realize I'm scared my ex-husband will try to claim he's entitled to half even though we're divorcing. Liam must see the panic on my face because he starts explaining that, because I bought the ticket after filing for divorce and after separating our finances, Paul has no legal claim to the winnings. The relief hits me so hard I actually get dizzy, and Liam makes me sit with my head between my knees while he gets me water from the cooler in the corner. He sits down across from me and explains that the ticket purchase date and my separate bank account records prove this is my separate property, not marital assets. He schedules an emergency appointment with the lottery office for tomorrow morning and tells me to bring my separation paperwork and the documentation of Paul's fraud. I drive home to my tiny apartment feeling like I'm floating, and that night I can't sleep because I keep thinking about Kira's tuition that bounced and Amelia asking why we had to cancel her summer camp. I pull out my laptop and start researching how lottery winners protect their money, reading horror stories about people who went bankrupt within years. One article talks about a guy who won $10 million and lost it all in 5 years to bad investments, and family members asking for money. Another describes a woman whose husband divorced her specifically to get half the lottery winnings. The irony that Paul gambled away our actual savings while I'm now scared of losing money I won by chance isn't lost on me. I read until 3 in the morning, taking notes on financial advisors and investment strategies and anonymous trusts. The next morning at the lottery office, I meet with officials who verify my ticket and explain the payout options. They tell me I can take a lump sum of about $1.9 million after taxes, or annuity payments over 30 years. Liam advises the lump sum so Paul can't make future claims if laws change, and I sign papers that feel completely unreal. The officials congratulate me and explain the money will be deposited in my new account within 2 weeks. They hand me information packets about financial planning and warn me not to tell anyone about the win until I have proper legal and financial protection in place. I walk out feeling like I'm in someone else's life, like I'm watching this happen to a character in a movie instead of actually living it. I immediately call Kira and tell her to come home this weekend because we need to talk about something important. She sounds worried and asks if it's about Dad, and I tell her it's actually good news for once. And when she arrives Saturday morning, I show her the lottery ticket and her college account balance that I've already started rebuilding with my saved money. She stares at the ticket for a long time without saying anything, and then she bursts into tears of relief. Kira tells me she'd been looking at student loans and part-time jobs because she thought her education was over. She admits she's been so angry at Paul she hasn't spoken to him since finding out about the gambling, and she feels guilty about hating her own father. I tell her she's allowed to be angry and that Paul's actions have real consequences, including losing his children's respect and trust. She asks if the money means she can stay in the school, and I tell her yes. All 4 years are covered now. Amelia is harder to tell because she's younger and doesn't fully understand why Dad moved to Grandma's house or why we're getting divorced. I explain in simple terms that Dad made very bad choices with money and hurt our family, but now we have a chance to fix things and be okay. She asks if Dad can come back if he says sorry, and I have to tell her no. Some things can't be fixed with apologies. She cries and says she misses him, and I hold her while my heart breaks because Paul destroyed so much more than just money. A few days later, Paul's mother Shirley calls me and asks if we can meet for coffee. I'm nervous because I don't know whose side she's on, but she sounds sincere and sad. When we meet at the coffee shop near my apartment, she tells me Paul has been staying in her guest room, and she's horrified by what he did to us, especially stealing from his own children's future. Shirley tells me Paul keeps insisting he was close to winning big, and that I sabotaged him with my fake lottery scheme. She says she told him he destroyed his own life and needs to take responsibility, but he just makes excuses and talks about gambling strategies. She apologizes for raising a son who could do this to his family, and I tell her it's not her fault that Paul made these choices as an adult. 3 weeks after I tell Shirley it's not her fault, Liam calls me to say the divorce hearing is scheduled for next Thursday. Paul's lawyer has filed 3 motions to delay the proceedings, and each one got denied by the judge, who seems fed up with the tactics. I take the day off work and meet Liam at the courthouse downtown, where the halls smell like floor cleaner and stress. We sit on a wooden bench outside the courtroom, and Liam goes over his presentation one more time, showing me the thick folder of documents he's compiled. Paul arrives with his lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who keeps checking his phone, and Paul won't look at me when they walk past. Inside the courtroom, the judge is a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She listens to Paul's lawyer argue that the division of assets is premature, and that more time is needed to locate additional funds or accounts, which is ridiculous because Paul destroyed everything we had. Liam stands up and presents the judge with copies of the forged mortgage documents, the hidden credit card statements showing $300,000 in gambling losses, and the bank records proving Paul emptied our savings. The judge flips through the pages, and her expression gets harder with each document she reviews. She looks directly at Paul and asks him to explain how he justified stealing his daughter's college fund to gamble. Paul actually starts talking about his betting system, and how he was developing a strategy that would have paid off if he'd had more time, and his lawyer grabs his arm to shut him up, but the damage is done. The judge sets the papers down and says she's seen enough. She rules that Paul receives none of the marital assets, because he destroyed them through fraud and criminal forgery, and that the house goes entirely to me since Paul eliminated the equity with his illegal second mortgage. She orders him to pay child support based on his sales manager's salary, and says if he falls behind, she'll hold him in contempt. Paul's lawyer tries to argue this ruling is unfair, and leaves his client with nothing, but the judge cuts him off and says Paul forfeited fairness when he forged my signature and stole from his own children. The hearing ends, and I walk out feeling lighter than I have in months, like something heavy finally lifted off my shoulders. 2 weeks pass, and I'm working a night shift at the hospital when my phone buzzes with a bank notification. I pull it out during my break and stare at the screen showing my account balance of $1,900,000. The number doesn't look real even though I'm looking right at it. I sit in the break room with my coffee getting cold and just keep refreshing the banking app to make sure the money is actually there. When my shift ends at 7 in the morning, I drive straight home and call the number Liam gave me for a financial advisor named Viola Reed, who specializes in helping lottery winners. Her assistant answers, and I explain who I am, and that Liam recommended her, and she puts me on hold for maybe 30 seconds before Viola picks up. She has a calm, professional voice and says she can meet me today at 2 if I'm available. I tell her yes and spend the morning trying to sleep, but I keep thinking about that number in my account. At 1:30, I drive to her office in a building downtown with marble floors and expensive artwork on the walls. Viola is a black woman in her 40s wearing a navy suit, and she shakes my hand firmly before leading me to her office. She sits across from me, and the first thing she says is that the #1 rule for lottery winners is telling absolutely nobody else about the money until we have proper protection in place. I tell her I haven't told anyone except Liam, and she nods approvingly. We spend 3 hours going through my entire financial situation while she takes notes on a legal pad. She asks about my debts, my income, my expenses, and what I want for my future. I tell her about Kira's tuition and Amelia's future college costs, and the mortgage that still has Paul's forged second loan attached to it. Viola creates a plan right there in her office, writing out priorities on her pad. First priority is the kids' education, fully funded. Second is paying off the house completely and clearing all of Paul's debt that got assigned to me in the divorce. Third is conservative investments that will generate steady income. And she explains that if I'm careful with the money, I could live comfortably off the investment returns, maybe even quit nursing if I wanted to. The idea of not working scares me more than it should because after 15 years of Paul's lies, I don't trust anything that seems too easy or too good. I tell Viola I want to keep my job, and she smiles and says, "That's actually smart because it maintains routine and purpose." Before I leave, she gives me homework, forms to fill out and documents to gather, and schedules our next meeting for Friday. I decide that same week to stay working at the hospital because I genuinely love being a nurse and need the structure in my life. But I also decide to use the money the way it should be used, for my daughter's futures. I call the college bursar's office and tell them I want to pay off Kira's entire 4 years of tuition in advance. The woman on the phone sounds confused and asks me to repeat myself, so I do. She puts me on hold and comes back with someone from the financial aid department who asks if I'm sure about paying the full amount. I tell her yes, and she walks me through the process of making a wire transfer for $68,000. When the payment clears 2 days later, the financial aid officer calls me back personally to confirm receipt, and she sounds amazed. She's the same woman who called me months ago to tell me Kira's tuition payment bounced, and I tell her my circumstances changed dramatically. I set up the same arrangement for Amelia, even though she won't start college for 3 more years, putting the money in a dedicated education account that will be ready when she needs it. Telling Kira that her entire college is paid for happens over video chat because she's back at the school for the semester. She cries again and keeps asking if I'm sure, if this is real, if she really doesn't have to worry anymore. I promise her it's real, and she can focus completely on her classes and her life without any financial stress. Kurt Stevenson shows up at my house the following Tuesday with 2 briefcases full of documents. Liam brought him in as an accountant to help sort through the complete disaster of Paul's financial fraud. Kurt is maybe 60 with gray hair and reading glasses that he keeps pushing up his nose. He spreads papers across my kitchen table, and we spend 4 hours going through everything Paul did. The credit cards in both our names that I never knew existed total $42,000 in debt. The loan documents with my forged signature add another $30,000. Paul borrowed against his 401k retirement account and never paid it back, so there are penalties and taxes owed. Kurt methodically photographs every document and creates a spreadsheet tracking each fraudulent debt with dates and amounts. He explains that we can dispute the debts legally tied to my name since I never authorized them, and my signature was forged, but it will take time and paperwork. He files disputes with all 3 credit bureaus and writes letters to the credit card companies with copies of the forgery evidence from the divorce case. Some of the companies write back within weeks saying they'll remove the debt from my credit report once they verify the fraud. Others take longer and require more documentation. Kurt handles all of it while I work my nursing shifts and try to rebuild some kind of normal life. By the end of the month, he's cleared about 60% of the fraudulent debt from my name and says the rest should follow in the next few months. Paul finds out about the lottery somehow, even though I've been so careful about keeping it quiet. I'm guessing his brother Wayne heard rumors around town because people talk, and someone at the lottery office probably mentioned it to someone else. It's a Thursday evening, and I'm making dinner when someone starts pounding on my front door hard enough to rattle the frame. I look through the peephole and see Paul on my porch looking wild and angry. He's yelling that I owe him half the lottery money because we were still married when I bought the ticket. I grab my phone and call 911 while he keeps pounding and shouting about community property and how I can't steal what's rightfully his. The operator tells me to stay inside and that police are on the way. Paul won't stop screaming through the door about how I tricked him and sabotaged him, and now I'm keeping money that belongs to both of us. 2 police officers arrive within 10 minutes, and I watch through the window as they talk to Paul on the front lawn. He's gesturing wildly and pointing at my house, and I can hear him yelling even through the closed windows. One officer walks up to my door, and I open it to explain the situation, showing him the restraining order paperwork Liam filed last week. The officer goes back to Paul, and I see them having a serious conversation before Paul finally gets in his car. The officer comes back to tell me they've warned Paul about harassment, and that if he returns, they'll arrest him for violating the restraining order. I thank them and lock the door and sit on my couch shaking for 20 minutes after they leave. Paul's lawyer files an emergency motion 3 days later claiming Paul is entitled to half the lottery winnings. Liam calls me as soon as he gets the motion and tells me not to worry because we have strong evidence. The emergency hearing happens the next week, and I sit next to Liam while Paul's lawyer argues that the ticket was purchased during the marriage, so the winnings are community property. Liam stands up with his own folder of evidence and walks the judge through the timeline. He shows bank statements proving I bought the ticket 6 months ago with money from my separate account that I opened after discovering Paul's fraud. He presents the divorce filing date and the documentation of Paul's criminal forgery, and the $300,000 in gambling losses that destroyed our marital assets. Liam argues that Paul eliminated any claim to community property when he fraudulently destroyed everything we had, and that I purchased the ticket with my own separate earnings after the marriage was effectively over. The judge reviews the evidence for maybe 5 minutes before denying Paul's motion completely. She tells Paul's lawyer that filing frivolous claims wastes the court's time, and that any future motions of this nature will result in sanctions. Paul's lawyer looks embarrassed, and Paul looks furious, but there's nothing either of them can do. Wayne calls my cell phone that weekend, and I almost don't answer because I don't want to deal with Paul's family. But I pick up, and Wayne starts by apologizing for lending Paul money based on the fake lottery story. Then he asks if I can help him get repaid since Paul obviously can't pay him back, and Wayne heard about my real lottery win. I tell him I'm sorry he lost money, but Paul's debts are Paul's responsibility, not mine. Wayne gets angry and says family should help family, and that I'm being selfish when I have all this money now. I point out that Paul didn't think about family when he stole from his daughter's college fund and gambled away their futures. Wayne says that's different and I should be the bigger person. I tell him he made a choice to loan money to someone with a known gambling problem, and that's on him, not me. He calls me some names and hangs up. I block his number and hope that's the end of dealing with Paul's side of the family. Kira comes home for winter break in mid-December, and she looks healthier than she did at Thanksgiving. We're having coffee in the kitchen when she tells me her grades improved this semester, now that she's not constantly worried about money. She joined a campus group for students affected by parental addiction, and says talking to others who understand helps her process what Paul did. But she tells me about other students whose parents gambled or drank or used drugs and destroyed their families. Hearing that she found support makes me feel less guilty about the situation, even though none of it was my fault. Kira asks if I'll go to a family session with her and her campus counselor when she gets back to the school in January. She says the counselor does family sessions over video chat and thinks it would help us both. I tell her yes immediately because I want to support her healing however I can. The video session with Kira's counselor happens on a Tuesday evening when Amelia is at a friend's house. I sit at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at my own face in the little camera box while I wait for the session to start. Kira appears on screen from her dorm room, and then the counselor joins from her office on campus. The counselor introduces herself and thanks me for making time for this session. She has gray hair and kind eyes, and she explains that Kira has been working through some complicated feelings about her dad. Kira looks nervous sitting at her dorm room desk with her hands folded in her lap. The counselor asks Kira to share what she's been processing in their individual sessions, and Kira takes a deep breath before speaking. She talks about how she remembers Dad teaching her to ride a bike and helping with her science fair projects, and how those good memories feel tainted now that she knows what he was doing during all those years. She says it's confusing to love someone who hurt her so badly, and to miss him even though she's angry at him. The counselor nods and explains that Paul's gambling problem doesn't erase the good father he sometimes was, but it also doesn't excuse what he did to our family. She helps us talk through how addiction can coexist with love, and how Kira can hold both truths at once without feeling guilty. I tell Kira she gets to decide what kind of relationship she wants with her father going forward, whether that's no contact or limited contact or something else entirely, and I'll support whatever feels right to her. Kira cries a little and says she doesn't know yet what she wants, and I tell her that's okay, and she has time to figure it out. Amelia sits at the kitchen table doing homework when she looks up and asks why we can suddenly afford the new laptop she needed for school. I've been waiting for this conversation, but hoping it would wait until she was older. I sit down across from her and explain that Dad had a problem with gambling that hurt our family's money situation, but that I've been working hard and we got some help that made things better. She asks why we're getting divorced if things are better now, and I tell her that Dad's choices broke our family's trust in ways that can't be fixed just with money. She's quiet for a minute, picking at the edge of her placemat, then asks if Dad gambled away her college fund too, like he did with Kira's. I tell her yes, but that I've made sure both of their college funds are protected now, and she doesn't need to worry about that anymore. She wants to know if she has to visit Dad at Grandma's house, and I can see the fear in her eyes that I'll force her to go. I tell her she doesn't have to see him until she feels ready, and that might be next week or next year or maybe never, and all of those choices are okay. She asks if that makes her a bad daughter, and I pull her into a hug and tell her that Dad's choices hurt her, and she gets to decide what she needs to heal. She cries against my shoulder for a while, and I just hold her, thinking about how Paul's gambling didn't just steal money but stole her sense of security in having a father she could trust. 3 weeks later, Shirley calls while I'm doing laundry and folding Amelia's school clothes. I almost don't answer because dealing with Paul's family exhausts me, but Shirley has been decent through all this, so I pick up. She tells me Paul checked himself into a 30-day gambling addiction program at a treatment center 2 hours away. Her voice sounds tired and sad when she explains he finally hit his actual rock bottom after the judge denied his claim to my lottery money. He'd been living in her guest room and she'd been monitoring his bank account to make sure he wasn't gambling, but he borrowed her car one night and drove to the casino. He lost the $800 she'd loaned him for job interview clothes and came home at 3 a.m. sobbing. She drove him to the treatment center the next day, and he admitted himself voluntarily for the first time in his life. I ask her how he's doing, and she pauses before answering. She tells me he's starting to understand what he destroyed, but he's not there yet on taking full responsibility, still making excuses about bad luck and timing. She says the counselors are working with him on recognizing how addiction warped his thinking and made him rationalize stealing from his own children. I tell her I hope the treatment helps him because I don't want Paul to suffer. I just needed him out of our lives so he couldn't hurt us anymore. Shirley thanks me for saying that and tells me she knows I'm a good person who didn't deserve what Paul did. She says she's been going to a support group for families of addicts and learning that enabling him all those years didn't help anyone. I tell her I'm glad she's getting support too because this affected her as well, losing the son she thought she knew. Amelia sits at the kitchen table doing homework when she suddenly looks up and asks why we can afford the new laptop she needed for school, when last year we couldn't even fix the washing machine. I've been dreading this conversation, but knowing it had to happen eventually, so I close my own laptop and sit down across from her. She's 12 now and old enough to understand some version of the truth, even if I can't tell her everything. I explain that Dad had a problem with gambling where he couldn't stop betting money even when he kept losing, and that problem hurt our family badly because he spent money that was supposed to be for important things like her sister's college. Amelia asks why Dad would do that if he knew it was wrong, and I tell her that addiction makes people do things they wouldn't normally do, that it's like a sickness in their brain that makes them keep going back even when they know it's hurting everyone. She sits quiet for a minute, picking at her sandwich crust, and then asks if we have money now because I won the lottery like the kids at the school are saying. I tell her yes, I did win money, and that's why we could suddenly afford her new backpack and the school trip she wanted to go on. She asks if Dad knows about the money, and if that's why he keeps calling Grandma asking about us. I tell her Dad made choices that hurt our family, and those choices have results. And one result is that he doesn't get to be part of our money or our decisions anymore. She's quiet for a minute, picking at her sandwich, then asks if the lottery money makes up for Dad stealing from us. I tell her no, nothing makes that okay. But sometimes good things and bad things happen close together, and that doesn't mean they're connected. She nods like she's trying to understand something too big for her age, and I feel that familiar anger at Paul for putting this weight on a kid who should be worrying about math homework and soccer practice instead of adult betrayals and financial disasters. Amelia asks if she has to see Dad, and I can hear the fear in her voice, like she thinks I'll force her to spend time with someone who scares her now. I kneel down so we're eye level and tell her she doesn't have to see anyone she doesn't want to see, that she's allowed to feel however she feels about what happened, and when she's ready to talk to him or see him, that'll be her choice. She hugs me tight and asks if we're really going to be okay now, and I tell her yes, we really are. My phone rings 2 days later while I'm folding laundry, and Shirley's name pops up on the screen. I almost don't answer because conversations with Paul's family have been exhausting, but something makes me pick up. She tells me Paul checked himself into a 30-day gambling treatment program at a facility 2 hours away, that he finally hit some kind of bottom she won't specify. Her voice sounds tired and relieved at the same time when she says he's starting to understand what he destroyed, though she's quick to add he's not taking full responsibility yet. I tell her I hope the treatment helps him because I genuinely do hope he gets better, but I also make it clear that my focus is on protecting Kira and Amelia and rebuilding what he tore down. Shirley says she understands and that she's proud of how I'm handling everything, which makes me feel strange because I never expected support from his side of the family. She asks if she can still see the girls sometimes, and I tell her, of course, that she's their grandmother and none of this is her fault. After we hang up, I sit there thinking about how Paul's in treatment now, finally admitting he has a problem, but it doesn't change what he destroyed or erase what he put us through. I hope treatment helps him become a better person eventually, but that's his journey now, not mine. My job is protecting Kira and Amelia and making sure they know none of this was their fault, and they deserve stability and honesty. 6 months pass, and I'm sitting in a folding chair at the outdoor graduation ceremony, watching Kira walk across the stage in her cap and gown to receive her college diploma. Amelia sits beside me clapping and cheering, and Shirley is in the row behind us, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The sun is bright and hot on my shoulders, and I'm holding my phone ready to take pictures when they call Kira's name. Paul isn't here because Kira told me 2 months ago she didn't want him at her graduation after everything he did, and while part of me feels sad about that, I also know it's the natural result of his choices and his actions. The lottery money paid for all 4 years of Kira's college without loans or stress, and it's sitting in accounts ready for Amelia when she starts college in 3 years. We have a house that's fully paid off and investments that will keep us stable for life if we're smart about it. But the real win wasn't the money, even though the money changed everything practically. The real win was finding the strength to protect my daughters when Paul wouldn't, to see through his lies and manipulation, to fight back instead of just accepting what he'd done to us. I'm not the same person who trusted blindly for 15 years while Paul destroyed our future. I'm harder now, more careful about who I trust and what I believe. I check bank statements obsessively, and I probably always will. But I'm also more certain of what matters and what I'll accept from people in my life. Kira's name gets called, and she walks across the stage in her cap and gown, and I'm taking pictures and cheering with Amelia beside me doing the same. Shirley is in the row behind us, clapping and wiping her eyes, and I'm glad she's here even though her son isn't. Life isn't perfect, and the betrayal still hurts when I think about those 15 years of lies. But we're genuinely okay now, my daughters and me. We're stable and safe and moving forward, and that's more than enough.